Hi kids, these are the notes about figurative language. A lot of this is going to be familiar to you because you've already learned about a lot of it from your English teacher. So that's actually great. If I can reinforce any of the things you've already learned, that's fantastic. And if you learn some new things from me, that's good too. If there are things I tell you that are a little different from what you've learned from your English teacher, just know that within any academic discipline, like English, language arts, or math, or any of the sciences, reasonable people who have expertise in that area will disagree. So it's possible that Mrs. Cannon or Mrs. McKinnon will interpret a certain type of figurative language one way, and I might interpret it a little differently. So if you notice differences between things I'm saying and things they said, just let yourself be okay with that. Okay, so I've used this word literary devices a little bit so far in the quarter, and figurative language is the first one that we're going to talk about. Literary devices. So a device is like a thing that has a purpose, like a tool, right? Literary devices are things that authors do in language that helps them communicate meaning beyond just the content of the word. So when you read, you're picking up all this meaning, and only some of it is coming from the words and their actual definitions. A lot of the meaning is coming from things like what the tone of voice sounds like of the speaker or the narrator, what the setting feels like if it's a story, if the writer is using words that have particular letter sounds in them that create a sort of a particular mood, the punctuation the writer is using, the pictures they're painting with words. Um, those are all literary devices. They add meaning to the piece of writing, and expert writers use them on purpose. So figurative language is the first one we're going to talk about. I think we're going to talk about 7 of them. The definition of figurative language I'm going to give you is it's any language that does communicate meaning, so you hear it and you understand it, but it's not literally true. It's not literally true. And if you're wondering what literally true means true word for word. This might be a little confusing to you because in the last 10 or 15 years, people have started to use the word literally when what they really mean is figuratively. So if somebody says, I'm so hungry, I'm literally going to die, that's actually the opposite of what literally means. It's funny because it's dramatic, like it's exaggeration. It's hyperbole, actually, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But when somebody says that, that's technically a false statement. If they said, I'm so hungry, I'm figuratively going to die, that would actually be a true statement. All right, so literally means the actual words themselves are actually true. If you've ever heard a grown-up use the term figure of speech, they're referring to figurative language. Maybe your mom would tell you, hey, take a seat. And you would pick up the chair and like drag it into the other room. And she'd say, what are you doing? And you would say, what? I'm taking a seat. You told me to take a seat. And then your mom would say, it's just a figure of speech. That's because take a seat is figurative language. You know what it means, although in that scenario I described, you're pretending that you don't just to like annoy your mom, right? You know what take a seat means, but technically take a seat, when somebody says take a seat, they are not actually telling you to take it. They're telling you to sit in it, right? Okay, so there are a lot of types of figurative language, and this first one is metaphor, metaphor. We have a whole set of notes just about metaphor. Metaphor gets its own lesson because metaphor is so important in literature. But I'll tell you right now that it falls into the larger category of figurative language. So metaphor is when an author is saying one thing is another thing or is like another thing. Those both count as metaphors. So my dog is a race car. That's a metaphor. His eyes were like a stormy sky. Also a metaphor. FYI, if you're saying to yourself, but that's a simile. Simile is a type of metaphor. Fun fact. Okay, so that's metaphor. Onomatopoeia is figurative language. That's words that describe actions, and the word sounds like the sound the action makes. A lot of you know this because I know they do onomatopoeia in elementary school. I used to not understand why onomatopoeia counts as figurative language, but then I figured it out. It's because when you have, like, say, a water faucet and it's dripping water in the middle of the night, it doesn't literally say drip, drip. Like if you went in your bathroom at night and the faucet was saying drip, drip, that would be so creepy and weird, right? So the word drip is not a literal expression of the sound. It's sort of like it's an approximation of the sound. So this is why we count onomatopoeia as figurative language. Bees don't literally say buzz, right? When you hit somebody in the face, not you, of course, because you would never do that, but when someone hits someone in the face, it doesn't literally go pow. So figurative language, not literally true, but you understand what it means. Here's a kind of figurative language that is what happens when an author is talking about an inanimate object. That's a thing that is not a creature, right? So not an animal, not a human, but like a tree or a pencil or a chair or a cloud. This is when an author is talking about an inanimate object as if it has human qualities or human behaviors. And this is personification. I think you've heard about this one as well. It's person, ification, I-F-I-C-A-T-I-O-N. To ificate something is to like make it into. So it's like personification is making something into a person. So if you say the sun smiled upon us, the wind sighed in the trees. Suns can't smile because they don't have mouths, right? Wind can't sigh because it doesn't have a mouth or lungs, right? The pencil leaped out of my hand. Pencil can't do that. Doesn't have legs for leaping. Those are all examples of personification. I put here in parentheses just a fun fact for those of you who find this really interesting. It's not personification if you're talking about animals, because they don't quite count as inanimate objects. It's a separate thing called anthropomorphizing, talking about animals as if they have human feelings. And it's irrelevant, really. We're not going to talk about it ever again. That's why I put it in italics, but I thought you would find it interesting. Here's this kind of figurative language that is, it has to be an expression, first off, so not a single word, but a handful of words. And it sounds literally like it's one thing, but actually what it means is another thing. And what this is an idiom. An idiom. So if your mom says, what's the first thing you're going to do when coronavirus is done? And you say, I'm going to hang out with my friends. Hanging out is an idiom. It's an expression. It's more than one word. And it doesn't sound at all like socializing. Like there's no hanging involved. But that's what it means. Now, little subnote here. Although I want you to know what idioms are, you almost never see them in literature, except for sometimes when characters are talking to each other. And that's because idioms are cliche. Cliche means they've been used so much before that the reader recognizes them when the reader reads them. They're familiar. So why wouldn't a good writer use idioms in their excellent writing? Because a good writer, remember the 4 qualities of good creative writing, of literature, right? One of them is it's original. Idioms are the opposite of original. Every single idiom is a cliche. If you think about it, it makes sense. Because if it wasn't a cliche, you wouldn't know what it meant, right? The only reason you know what hanging out means is because you've heard people say it, right? One time, my son was like fooling around on a keyboard and his dad was playing guitar, and my son was like 3 or 4, and his dad gestured to him and he said, hit it. And so what my son did is he went over and smacked the keyboard really hard because he had never heard that idiom, hit it. Hit it means start playing music, right? But he was like 4, so he didn't know. So he just literally hit it, right? So in order for an idiom to actually like it makes sense as an idiom, it has to be something you've heard before. Therefore, it is cliche. Therefore, good writers will generally not use them. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's like like 95% of the time, you're not going to see idioms in literature unless it's in dialogue. But you should just know what they are. Okay, hyperbole. Don't say hyperbole. The more you say that word out loud, hyperbole, the more likely you are to forget the correct pronunciation. So practice saying hyperbole. There are a bunch of words in language arts that come from Greek, and we pronounce the E on the end, like simile, apostrophe. Hyperbole is one. So hyperbole is when a writer is exaggerating something that is basically true, but the exaggerated version they're giving isn't true. So if somebody said, I'm so hungry, I'm literally going to starve to death, that's exaggeration, but the less dramatic version of that is true. Like the person is really hungry. So in order for something to be hyperbole, the less dramatic version has to be true. If it's not, then it's not hyperbole. A lot of times it's just actually sarcasm. Like if your friend sees you in a cool sweatshirt and says, oh my gosh, I love your sweatshirt so much, I want to marry it. That's hyperbole. Like they legitimately do like your sweatshirt. They're exaggerating in order to either be funny or to express the intensity of their emotion. But if you came in and like your worst enemy saw you in the sweatshirt and like glared at you and said, love your sweatshirt, I want to marry it, that's not hyperbole. You would be able to infer from their tone that what they mean is actually the opposite. That would just be sarcasm. So in order for it to be hyperbole, the less dramatic version has to actually, they have to be expressing a true sentiment. They're just exaggerating it. Now, I say here, this is not an exhaustive list because there are other types of figurative language. If you go Google types of figurative language, like, let's see, figurative language examples list, and let's just like look at what we get. There are several more. This has got like maybe 10 items on it, right? And I'm only talking about a few. These are just ones I think are important for you to know. P.S. This word exhaustive, fun word for you to know. This is an SAT word. It's not the same as exhausted. Exhausted means like totally worn out, right? Exhaustive means complete, has included every single item, has used up all the items. All right. And so what your task is now, after you have these notes on figurative language, is you're going to go over to your note-taking grid and you're going to do a row on figurative language. All right.